I've got space for it.
Okay, it is 5 p.m. on Thursday, February 29th, 2024. I'm going to call this special town meeting to order. The purpose of this meeting is to approve the financing plan to raise the funds for the acquisition and operation of the Madeline Island Ferry Line by the town of LaPointe and its Harbor Commission. We are joined tonight by Sean Lentz with Ehlers Financial Consultants, who has been deeply involved in preparing the financial analyses that have led us to where we are tonight. And so he is prepared to answer questions folks may have. I think, Sean, if I understand, you have a brief presentation that you'd like to make. You're on mute.
Sorry about that, Glenn. Thank you. Yes, I've got a presentation that I think covers the broad strokes of the finance plan. And can will it work if I share my screen with you guys and hopefully be up on the screen for you to see the presentation?
We haven't done this before, but we can give it a try and see how it works.
All right. I may need somebody on your end to allow me to do that.
Okay.
One sec.
Yeah, let's
I'm gonna try it again here. Oh, there we go.
okay. There we
Yeah,
go.
if you let me, oh, you see it. Perfect. Okay. So I'll move through the material, and if any questions come up, I don't mind at all being interrupted, or if the folks who've been intimately involved with this over the process of putting everything together have extra comments, again, feel free to interrupt me. That would be just fine.
There are 3 of them in the room right now, Sean.
Okay, great, thank you. So just as a quick background, and I think the group is aware of this, but what we're acquiring are the vessels, the real estate, other tangible assets, and premium goodwill involved with the cost for a total purchase price of $17,321,000 for the town and Harbor Commission to acquire the Madeline Island Ferry Line. So with that as a background, wanted to talk with you about the different funding sources that we've put together to fund the project, and it lets you know a little bit more about what does it mean to use these debt instruments. The first debt instrument I want to talk about is general obligation debt. You can see this on page 3. Hopefully it's clearly on your screen. Now, when the town issues general obligation debt, what you're backing that debt with ultimately is your ability to levy a tax and collect then tax revenue to make the annual payments. So general obligation debt is a very powerful financing tool for governmental entities in Wisconsin to use. Now, you are backing this debt with the levy, but if you have other funding sources available, you can use those other funding sources to make the annual debt service payments. And in this case, the plan is to use revenues generated by the ferry line to make the annual debt service payments due on the general obligation debt that the town anticipates issuing. So that is certainly allowable up into the amount of completely eliminating the need for the levy. But if in a worst case scenario, those revenues were not available, the commitment of the town would be to levy the tax so that the debt service payments are made. The general obligation debt that we plan to issue for the ferry line acquisition falls into two categories or two types. One is the state of Wisconsin's Board of Commissioners of Public Lands has a loan program backed by general obligation pledge called the State Trust Fund Loan Program. And in discussions with the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands, they are able to provide financing in the amount of $4.9 million. The financing will have a 20-year fixed interest rate financing term. And so the interest rate would be locked at the time of issuance at a 6% rate. The payments are annually on March 15th of each year, starting in 2025. And the loan itself is prepayable annually if dollars were available to do so, with a 30-day notice to the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands. And it's not callable or prepayable all year long, only between the window of January 1st and September 1st. Last thing I'll point out about the State Trust Fund loan, again, it's a fixed interest rate financing. The term, the 20-year debt term, is the longest for general obligation debt that we are allowed to do under Wisconsin law. General obligation debt has to be fully repaid within 20 years. Now, excuse me, the second type of GO debt that we have been working on with the town is the issuance of $5,374,000 in general obligation promissory notes. We have been working at the direction of the town and Harbor Commission with Bremer Bank, who I know has worked with the town on other financing projects in the past and understands the ferry line operation very well. The financing right now, the final interest rate will not be locked in until March 12th, which then there'll be another meeting that night of the town board. But the interest rate would be locked the morning of March 12th. The financing would be for a beginning period of 10 years, but would have a 20-year amortization, meaning that there would be a balloon payment due in the 10th year that we would anticipate extending for up to an additional 10-year period. As a placeholder for now, we've set the interest rate at 6.97%. This is through an agreement on a mathematical calculation of what the final rate will be. It's based on an index. And we've also added 0.25% or 25 basis points above that for to be on the conservative end for the numbers that we're preparing and discussing with you this evening. The promissory note, one last thing mentioned on that is it will be prepayable through the first 5 years, but there'll be a premium that the town would have to pay to make those prepayments in the first 5 years. It starts at 5% premium on the outstanding principal balance and then goes down to 1% in the 5th year. But starting in the 5th year through the 10th year, the bonds can be refinanced or prepaid at par. So no premium after that date. So those are the two general obligation issues, again, backed by the full faith and credit, the ability to levy that we plan to issue to finance the acquisition of the ferry line, but our intended revenue source to pay back the annual debt service on both of these issues are revenues from the ferry line itself. Before going on to the financing for the rest of the acquisition, is there any questions on either of these two notes and loans?
Doesn't seem to be. Go ahead, Sean.
Great, thank you. So here is, excuse me, there we go. The schedule, the proposed repayment schedule for the two issues. I won't go through this in great detail. On
Yeah,
the
it's a little
left,
hard to, it's a
Oh.
little hard to read from here.
see if I can,
Okay, there you go.
is that any better?
Yeah, much.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this issue with the 6% interest rate, again, that's already committed with the state. The payments in green under the column total P&I would be the payments through the full 20 years. First payment due March of 2025, March 15th of 2025 is interest only. And then the payments through full payoff in 2044, principal and interest, are approximately $439,274 a year to pay that off over the 20 years. The second note for the $5,374,000, again, the interest rate has not been finalized yet, and I've added about a 25% or 25 basis point cushion on top of where the current market rates are. This issue will have an interest-only payment later this year that was included in the issue itself, so that we'll have a funding source while we get the ferry line under town operation up and running. So that payment will be covered. And then starting in 2025 through 2032, the payments are estimated to be around $522,000 to $523,000 a year. And then there is that balloon payment due in 2033. And the intention would be between 2029 and 2032 at some point to extend that payment out for an additional 10 years going out to 2044. So those are the two payments that, if the revenues were not available from the ferry line, these would be the payments that would have to be levied for, again, in the event that the ferry line revenues were not available. That would be the end-all commitment to make these payments each year. Again, with the idea that the planned source of revenues for these payments is the ferry line operation. All right. I'm going to go forward here and I'll shrink this down so we can all see this. The other remaining funding sources for the ferry line acquisition are debt issues not backed by the full faith and credit of the town without the general obligation pledge. They fall into the category of a revenue bond and what's called a note anticipation note. And I'll go into that more detail here in a second. The revenue bonds are backed by collateral on all of the assets of the ferry line that the town is acquiring, as well as a lien on the net revenues after operating costs have been paid for the ferry line. So this is not backed by a full faith and credit of the town, but again, the collateral on the assets and then the revenues from operating the ferry line are the pledge to make this payment. What the town and the Harbor Commission will be doing is each month they will be setting aside 1/12 of the next debt service payment upcoming in a debt service fund, so that when that payment arrives, in this case, it'll be at the end of or in the beginning of December each year, those dollars then would be available to make that payment at that time. Bremer Bank, as we talked about with the GEO note, is also in a position and willing to fund the revenue bonds as well. The interest rate, again, with that 25 basis point cushion added to it, at this point is fixed for 10 years. And it would be an interest rate of about 7.42% currently. The repayment term, though, for the revenue bond is expected to be over a 30-year amortization period rather than the 20 years like the general obligation. Revenue bonds under Wisconsin statutes can go up to 40 years, but the plan in this case is to repay the revenue bond over 30. And at the point of March 12th, we expect to enter into a fixed interest rate for the first 10 years. The prepayment is just as we talked about with the general obligation issue that Bremer Bank is purchasing, where we have a premium that would have to be paid if we wanted to prepay during the first 5 years of the 10-year term. But in the last 5 years, we're able to prepay at par without any premium attached to that. Now, the remaining financing to cover all of the 17+ million in acquisition is being financed with a note anticipation note. Now, what a note anticipation note is, it's a temporary form of financing with interest-only payments for the first 5 years and then a balloon payment due in the 10th year. The pledge of the town when you issue a note anticipation note is that at a later date, you will issue general obligation debt to refinance the note anticipation note, pay it off, and extend it over a longer period of time. The planned revenue repayment source for the note anticipation note is ferry line revenues, just like all of the other debt. But I know there has been some plans to outreach to find if there's any grant or other funding that may be available also to pay down some of the outstanding obligations. But ultimately, the annual debt service would be looked to the ferry line revenues to make those payments. The interest rate, again, would be a 5-year fixed rate, is expected to be the same rate that we lock in the general obligation note with Bremer Bank. And right now, again, I've got that rate projected at about 25 basis points above current market conditions. I'm going to enlarge this just to give you guys a sense of the repayment schedule. On the revenue bonds, which is the section here in the purple, again, we've included borrowing to cover the interest payment due December 1st of 2024. And then starting in 25 and thereafter, the projected interest payment or interest and principal payments each year at the conservative 7.42% is about $466,000 a year. Again, with that balloon payment requiring extension at the 10th year point, and we're going to go up to another 20 years with that being extended starting at that 10th year point. On the note anticipation notes, the first payment would be due at December of this year, an interest-only payment. And then June and December of each year, there'll be semi-annual interest payments. You're seeing the total amount here. Again, with the projected interest rate, with the 25 basis point cushion on it, for the next 5 years, we'd pay, or 4 years, excuse me, interest only. And then in 2028, we would be looking to extend, if by possible other funding sources come in, maybe buying down this principal balloon payment, but it will have to be extended at a later date, whatever principal balance is remaining in 2028. All right. Now this last slide, I'm going to increase the size here a little bit more to make sure we can go through this. This is probably the most important slide of the presentation today, because what it's doing is it's putting together the projected revenues of the ferry line under town ownership from the feasibility analysis that we've been working with the current owner, as well as Town and Harbor Commission, the group as a collective, to put together a feasibility and financing plan going forward with town ownership of the ferry line. So what you're seeing here, this is a summation of a much more detailed plan, which has a lot more detail on the operating revenues and expenses of the ferry line operation. But what you're seeing on the screen right now is the projection of revenues after paying operating costs each year that would be available to pay debt service going forward. So for the next year's operation, 24 through 25, end of March to April 1st each year, or April 1st to March 31st is the operating year. Year one, the projection is expecting about $1,571,000 in revenues available to pay debt service on the ferry acquisition debt. And then in the future, you see those projections are gradually increasing, and that's with planned tariff adjustments to the charges that will be on the operation of the ferry line and the charges to customers using the ferry operation into future years. So it's a gradual adjustment of rates to ensure that we have sufficient dollars to cover the existing debt, the new debt, excuse me, that we're taking out for the acquisition of the ferry line. Now, if I go to the top of the page, you'll see these numbers, net of operating expenses of the ferry line, showing up here as revenue available for debt service. And then as we move from left to right, what we're showing is the use of those revenues to pay the various debt issues that I discussed earlier in the presentation. The debt issue that would have the first lien on the revenues of the ferry line after, again, paying operating costs would be the revenue bond, the 5.4 million revenue bond. And you can see each year that debt service of about 466,000 a year until the balloon payment in 2033. With these revenues, we're showing a debt coverage in the 3 to 4, sometimes 5 times revenues available to pay the debt, which is very good. Bremer is requiring at least a 2.5 coverage on that revenue bond, so we're solidly above that. Now, after making that payment on the revenue bonds, then we'll be using the revenues remaining after making that first debt service payment to pay that note anticipation note and the 2 general obligation notes we talked about, the $5,374,000 to be purchased by Bremer and the $4.9 million to be the financing being provided by the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands. The note anticipation note is projected to have interest-only payments through 2028, and then we're showing a projection to pay it off over the next 20 years of a $3 million extended issue going forward. So you can see those payments going up as we begin to pay principal starting in 2028. I'm going to scroll over to the end. With the combination of the revenue bonds, the note anticipation note, and the general obligation issues, we're expecting the payments to jump when it's all together up into the $1.6 million, $1.7 million range in debt service each year till we get to that balloon payment due in 2033. And the total debt coverage, so all of the debt payments being paid by, again, the revenues net of operating costs of the ferry line, which we had over here, and we had a little more detail at the bottom. They're showing a coverage running around in the 1.15, 1.15 times up to 120, 130 in that range over the next 10-year period. And what this is showing is if we can achieve those operating results to pay the operating costs of the ferry line and the debt service with the total debt coverage above 1.0 times then that would not require the need to have a levy to cover the debt service. It could be covered with the revenues that are generated by the ferry line itself. Any questions on this slide? I know this one is really the summation. And again, as I'd mentioned, I think the most important. So if there's any questions or others have thoughts about this, I certainly can stop now and answer those or let others speak in.
Anybody? No? Thank you, Sean. This has been, I think, very illuminating. If there are other aspects that you feel like we should cover at this point, happy to do that. But I think that we're probably ready to take have a reading of the resolution and take a vote of the townspeople unless are there further questions? Okay. Carol? Oh, good. So unless you want to hang out, Sean, you're more than welcome to watch, but we appreciate all your time and we're going to now move on to taking action.
Yeah, no problem. I hope this provided enough information for everybody to feel comfortable of the work that the town has been and the Harbor Commission have been putting together for this financing plan. If other questions do come up, I think you guys have my number. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to try to answer those if at all possible or needed.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you.
You
Thank
bet.
you, John.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
You too.
Hey, Carol, I will recognize you.
I've been
You will
the
read the resolution.
designated reader of the resolutions. In the town of Point, County of Ashland, Wisconsin, resolution number 2024-20229. Electors to authorize the town tax levy at a special meeting of the electors. Whereas the town board of LaPointe, Wisconsin, the town is in the process of acquiring the assets of the Madeline Island Ferry Line, Inc., including the vessels and real and personal property used in the operation of the ferry line service, quoted the ferry line facilities. Whereas the purchase of the ferry line facilities, the town's plan of finance is to issue the following obligations. The town is issuing its general obligation promissory note series 2024A in the approximate principal amount of $5,374,000 payable from an ad valorem tax levy. The town is issuing its ferry line service system revenue bond series 2024B in the approximate principal amount of $5,432,000 payable from net revenues of the Madeline Ferry Lines facility. The town is issuing its ferry line service note anticipation note series 2024C in the aggregate principal amount of $3 million payable from the town's general obligation promissory note pledged to be issued on or before December 1st, 2028, and which will be paid from the ad valorem tax levy. The town is issuing a state trust fund note, series 2024D, in the principal amount of $4,900,000, payable from an ad valorem tax levy. And the town is issuing a taxable note anticipation note, series 2024E, in the principal amount of $600,000 to provide a revolving line of credit for operations of the Madeline Island Ferry Line facilities, payable from the town's general obligation promissory note, pledged to be issued on or before March 1st, 2029, and which will be payable from an ad valorem tax levy. Whereas Wisconsin State Statute 66.10(2)(a) authorizes the town electors at a town meeting to authorize the town to raise money by authorizing a tax levy to pay for the expenses of the town. Whereas pursuant to the requirements of the Wisconsin State Statutes 60.12, the town called for a special meeting by resolution on February 6th, 2024, and has caused a Class 2 notice to be properly published in the Ashland Daily Press on February 13th, 2024, and February 20th, 2024. Now and therefore, the special meeting of the town of Point, Ashland County, Wisconsin, by a majority vote of the eligible electors voting, friend, the town electors, this 29th day, February 2024, duly assembled and voting resolves and orders as follows. Be it resolved, the town electors hereby authorize the tax levy to pay the principal and interest on the following obligations, tax levy obligations. The general obligation promissory note 2024A in the approximately the principal amount of $5,374,000. The town's general obligation promissory note pledged to be issued on or before December 1st, 2028 to refinance the Ferry Line Service System Note Anticipation Notes, Series 2024C, is approximately the aggregate principal amount of $3 million. The State Trust Fund Note, Series 2024D, in the principal amount of $4,900,000 with an interest rate of 6%, and the town's general obligation promissory notes pledged to be issued on or before March 1st, 2029 to refinance the taxable note anticipation note Series 2024E in the approximate principal amount of $600,000. The interest rate on Series 2024A note will be fixed at an interest rate expected to be established on March 12th, 2024, based on a formula set forth in Bremer Bank proposal dated February 2nd, 2024, which the formula as of February 21st, 2024, would establish an annual interest rate of 6.72%. The interest rates on refunding obligations for 2024 C notes and the 2024 E obligation cannot be predicted at this time. The power granted by the town to this resolution shall be specific and limited to the full payment of the tax levy obligations. Pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 60.80, the town clerk shall properly post this resolution in 3 places or publish the resolution once in a qualified newspaper within 30 days of adoption. And it asks for adopted 29th day of February 2024 at the special town meeting.
Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Mike Stark, motion to adopt the resolution 2024-0229. That's it.
For second?
Second. Mike Childers.
Childers, second, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Woo-hoo, thank you very much. Let's see, going back to the agenda, is there a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Is that for real?
No.
Okay. It's unanimous to adjourn. Thank you all very much. Everyone.